Good evening. Welcome to the Walker Art Center and to Target Free Thursday Nights. My name is Andrew Blauvelt. I'm the design director and curator of architecture and design at the Walker. And welcome to tonight's regional premiere of Objectified. So for this evening, I'm very pleased to welcome back to the Walker Gary Hustwit, who last joined us here for his acclaimed documentary, Helvetica. Gary will introduce his latest work, Objectified, and will be back at the end to answer at the end of the screening to answer questions. And he's also graciously decided to answer questions for the 9 o'clock screening as well. So you can't lord it over the 9 o'clock crowd. So, but they'll be held at bay, so maybe they'll enjoy it. Gary has produced 6 documentary feature films, including the award-winning documentary about Wilco, I Am Trying to Break Your Heart. Before his current endeavors in filmmaking, Gary worked with the legendary punk label SST Records and with the independent publisher Incommunicado Press, and was vice president of media for Salon.com and started the indie label Plexifilm. His directorial debut, Helvetica, captured the imagination of designers, documentarians, and moviegoers with its artful presentation of what many had thought to be unrepresentable. Hustwit was nominated for the 2008 Independent Spirit Truer Than Fiction Award for Helvetica. His current project, Objectify, explores our complex relationship to manufactured objects, including a more intimate examination of some of today's leading designers who help shape the world around us. And Gary will now introduce the film. Please help me welcome Gary Hustwit.
Hey, thanks. Thanks to Andrew and everyone here at the Walker for having me. Andrew's actually in the film as well, so it's be sure to applaud when he comes on the screen. It'll make him feel better. I think he's a little bit nervous about seeing himself 40 feet wide, but so I was here 2 years ago with this my first film, Helvetica, and I didn't expect to make another design-related documentary immediately after finishing Helvetica, but I still had a lot of questions about what designers do and the effect of their work on our lives and what our relationship is to design in all sorts of forms, whether it's type and graphic design or manufactured objects. So I wanted to I had more questions, and making a film is a really great way of exploring a lot of questions. So that's what I did. So here we are again, 2 years later. I hope you enjoy it. Are any of you Twittering? 3 people, that's it? Come on, admit it. Okay, not for the next 75 minutes, you're not. Put it away. Yeah, I'll come back afterwards and we can chat. And yeah, gosh, I hope you enjoy the film. Thanks again to everyone here at the Walker. Cheers.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks, everyone.
It's quite bright. Let's see. I think we're videoing this. So. We'll be opening to the audience for Q&A, and there'll be a couple people in the aisles with microphones, and we'd like to record your questions so we have it as part of our record here and for online. Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I was getting a signal.
It's really bright. Thank you.
At the, I think this is really goes throughout the film, but there's this idea of design for want and design for need that really is, I think, coursing through a lot of the shifts in practice and thinking, particularly emanating from schools, whether it's the field of architecture, product design, or even graphic design. There was a recent, I'm not sure the context of this, but there's a recent study released about, I don't know if it's about the economic meltdown or whatever, but of how people the shifts in what people defined as necessities in their lives, and how at one point television, the need for television was this great necessity, but that's actually fallen by the wayside in terms of now broadband internet access is considered the vital element, the vital commodity. Do you feel like you were at the precipice of that issue, or like you started out by saying that you had a lot of questions after Helvetica, and did you get many answers, I think?
Okay, first off, how about a round of applause for Andrew Blauvelt and the film? What was the question again?
Well, I mean, there's this joke that, designers say they're problem solvers, but really, the solution, design is a series of never-ending problems. Every solution begets yet another problem, which results in yet another design. There's this kind of treadmill effect to it all, and there's, and it gets into that in the film. I think the more, the critical commentary of the film really gets to what's a design for need versus a design for want, and I know that you.
I was just kidding about repeating the question.
Oh, okay.
I heard the question the first time.
You just went stalling for time.
It's interesting. I don't often quote Karam Rashid, but I'll have to quote him here because at one of the Q&As when we did a screening last week or the week before in New York, he kind of said, that when it's all said and done, we don't need any of these objects. We don't need anything. All we need is ourselves or each other. Sorry, that was this quote, and I thought that was kind of profound in a way. It's hard for me to figure out whether my attitudes towards designed objects and manufactured objects and the stuff in my life, if my attitudes were changing 2 years ago, which is why I wanted to make the film, or if making the film has somehow changed my my feelings about things. But
yeah, I mean, I don't know the full dates of production, but obviously there's been a big shift that happened starting in the fall about the world and
we started the film almost 2 years ago. So
yeah, so obviously you were still working, I think, up until the last minute. I don't know when your shooting stopped. Maybe the end of the last year is when filming.
We were shooting right up to March when we premiered it.
I mean. Did it become more pronounced, the need to make that, or was that element really always there and it was just more amplified given the context of
Well,
today?
no one actually says, economic downturn in the film, and we were still doing interviews while that was all happening in the very end of last year. But it seemed like I'm kind of more. I think I'm more interested in terms of manufactured objects and design and our relationship to these objects. In giving the sort of underpinnings of the issue rather than just be a mirror of news about how fucked everything is. Because you can just turn on the news or read the newspaper or read a blog for that. So I think that in some ways documentary is better at looking at the kind of underlying structures and reasons for things and use that in a way to better kind of formulate your own opinions to current events via kind of the opinions in the film. I mean, I was just really interested in what the designers' take on all of this stuff is, and I think they're asking these same questions of themselves, everything I make ends up in the landfill. Should I be making stuff? Should I be continuing to design things? So, I didn't start out the film with any kind of thesis or story I wanted to tell. It was really about talking to the designers and seeing what was on their minds, what are the issues facing them, what are the similarities. So we don't. I didn't set out to tell any story really.
Right. I mean, a lot of those ideas come and go. I mean, the idea of product obsolescence, even that term, is really a product of the 70s and the first ecological sort of movement. It becomes embedded in industrial design consciousness.
Yeah. Well, come on. We've built this system that is dependent on us buying new stuff, and we're complicit in it because we're the ones who are actually buying the things, and the designers are sort of complicit because they're continuing to make things. And those are the kind of the questions that I think I was having. How much stuff do I really need? And should the things that I do have should be really well designed and really functional and enable me in some way, whether it's for work or for play.
Right, and the idea of necessity. I guess I was trying to argue, like maybe the sustainable moment that's in the film, and then there's this. I think there's a new moment about necessity, and there's always this huge contradiction or tension, I guess, at least between okay, what objects am I going to grab when the house is on fire versus like why do I keep buying? Why do I always want the new thing? I'm not immune to that. I've got my iPhone. Mine's got an anti-glare screen, which works really well. You might want to tell that to the designer.
Yeah, but I think there's, God, I'm going to quote Karam Rashid again. His whole thing about the cardboard cell phone. I think if there are products that we know are going to only last a year or two before they either break or we want to upgrade them anyway, why are those things designed out of these really expensive metals and hard to recycle, and why are they designed to be permanent? It's different than if I'm going to buy a desk or something like that should last me the rest of my life, or
yeah, well, it justifies the price point on one hand, right? The reality justifies the price
exactly, because how much would you pay for the cardboard cell phone?
Right. Or
you wouldn't pay like $400 for the cardboard cell phone, would you?
No. But and then it's sort of like the inkjet printer thing, where you're paying more for the ink than you are the machine. They just give you the machine now, which is really pretty unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Because they've got the long-term goal. I think we want to open it up to questions, though. So from the audience, I think there's one over here.
Hi, I really enjoyed the movie, but I have a ton of questions, and I wish we could have kept pausing it to talk about it. So I'm just
That's what the DVD is for.
But you won't be there with that one.
I won't be there. You could email me though.
Okay, there'll be a long email.
Okay.
What about instead of looking at designing the most sustainable chair or the most sustainable whatever it is, looking at designing to keep the chairs that you have working, or looking at design that augments what already exists instead of something, even if it's super biodegradable, is
or
still
it's called
more.
Fixing things.
Yeah.
It's kind of a revolutionary new concept. I read like some articles about it in the Times recently.
Well, it is popular again, right? Shoe repair, big time. There's all these careers for the unemployed. Yeah.
Well, somebody was telling me, I think it was Dave Stoll, one of the guys from Smart Design. He's like, people demonize IKEA because it's cheap and whatever. He's like, I've had the same IKEA desks for like 15 years, and every couple of years I got to do a little bit of work on it and put new legs on it or something, but it still is, it's fine. It's about you getting bored of it or wanting a better desk or something else. It's more, it's like, how many times do we throw away things that really aren't broken or could be repaired, but it's just a hassle, and there's a new one, and it's cheaper, and it's sexier, and we want to buy. But wait, what was that the question, or was that wasn't the question?
That was part of the question. But going more broadly, like the World War II propaganda posters that would say recycle instead of throwing away and sew things instead of buying new. And it seems like there would be a place beyond just saying fix things or making nice posters that say fix things for designers to come in at that intersection instead of just selling new things.
Yeah, they're more conceptual projects, but they're like Drogue Design had a rejuvenation campaign that basically they were selling prosthetics, I guess is what you would call them, to like rehabilitate lamps, for example. So it's a form of recycling, but it's a form of reinvention, because then you get your fix, right? You get two fixes, I guess, because you made it and then you made it into something else, and that's an interesting strategy that I think could be deployed commercially on a bigger scale.
Sure. Well, most designers are either working in, big companies or they're consultants that are working freelance for big companies. So generally those companies want to sell stuff, new things. So I think it's kind of hard to, get one of those clients to have a campaign that says don't buy our stuff, fix our stuff, which actually would be really a great campaign these days.
What about a promise from a large company that says we won't build in obsolescence. If you buy this, we will continue to make sure that the next thing down the road that replaces it will still fit yours, or your computer screen will still work with the next something along those lines.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, it gets incredibly complicated because like all the component parts begin to shift as well, and so then you're locking in at certain chips that, you know, and then as technology advances, then your software won't work. You know, it's a complicated puzzle. The cardboard thing actually came up when I first heard that thing, was actually in the CPU tower. You know, use that as a cardboard container, you know, ship it UPS. It's basically a UPS box, and then it becomes the CPU tower. So there are strategies, I bet, though. It's just a different kind of value. It's like, where do you assign the value in the chain for the company? You know, it's sort of like the inkjet thing, but of course that's insane. But you know, if you take that a counterintuitive approach.
Yeah, but it's like, ask for it, you know? The designers can only do so much. If the companies think that that's what people want, and we don't enable the ones that are doing bad design by continuing to buy their stuff, then they'll change.
Thanks.
I have a question over here.
Where are you? Oh, hi.
Oh.
I've been asked to stand up. This is really uncomfortable, but I'd like to make an observation and then ask a question. Near the end of the movie there was a couple talking about, and then there was a video that they showed the woman with the platform shoes, you know, with the odd objects. That couple's the one I'm referring to.
Dunn and Raby.
Don and Raby. They said something initially, but then their work didn't quite go in that direction. And what they said initially that got me kind of jazzed was the thought that designers use a process that is so innovative and creative, and why isn't it applied in other arenas than to just designing objects? Because I think right now, you know, our society in a certain way is kind of stuck because of patterns of thinking that haven't gone anywhere.
Yeah.
And why can't design process, which is a very creative process, be used in other venues for other kinds of decision making?
Yeah, I think you're actually thinking of Paola Antonelli, who introduced that couple, saying that designers should be the go-betweens between government and you know, and systems. And that's happening a lot more in Europe than it is here. I think it's starting to happen here, but I think in most Scandinavian countries and even in the UK, there's much more involvement because, yeah, the same methodology that goes into designing you know, a toothbrush or you know, the problem-solving skills that designers use could be used to revolutionize healthcare or design you know, recycling systems or you know.
There was a lot of activity around after the Florida vote ballot debacle. There were a lot of designers actually looking at redesigning the whole voting experience. So it wasn't just a question of the butterfly ballot, it was about the whole process and experience and ordeals and roadblocks to being actually able to vote. And they took a very holistic picture. So there are a lot of designers out there who apply what we call design strategy and design thinking to solving social problems. I think part of the problem, though, is what status the designer has. Conventionally, status the designer has is working for private industry, and then when it becomes for the public sphere, it becomes bureaucratized. So therefore you get, you know, career-long bureaucrats essentially managing planning processes, for example, where they're locked into the world that they have created essentially of ordinances and zoning issues and not necessarily able to step out of that world and encounter it. So I think that's what Paolo was trying to say, that designers could occupy that role, and they're doing it somehow. And with Dunn and Raby, what's unique about them is they actually do use the object. The object is a prop, essentially, in order to talk about certain issues. And they've got other ones that they haven't made yet, like about genetic engineering, issues around genetic modification and engineering. And essentially they'll create an object that will provoke that kind of discussion around that theme.
Yeah, I mean, everyone in the film we only get to spend, you know, really just a couple of minutes with, but they're one group that I would suggest going online and looking at their stuff, because I think they're really interesting. And the reason I kind of put them in there's this, I don't know, the thinking behind how are we going to relate to objects in the future. I mean, in 20 or 30 years, we'll be laughing about, like, remember the touch screen? Remember we had to do this and we could stretch it out? it'll be completely different. And I like that people are thinking about that future of the kind of human-object relationship.
That's the other area where you get a lot of this interesting sort of conceptual product design, if I call it that, like in science fiction. When you have to project out into the future. So there are actually some product designers who create their designs on scenarios based from science fiction films or literature, for example, as a way of moving outside the here and now and all the limitations to the real world, quote unquote.
Go ahead.
I had a less philosophical question. I was wondering how you decided which people to speak with, and yeah, that's the question.
I basically just emailed Andrew and said who should be in the film, and then
he didn't.
He gave me a list, and then I was like, great, all right, then go down the list. It's a combination, I guess, of just designers whose work I admired or used on a daily basis, Johnny Ive, for instance. And then I spent about 6 months just kind of in pre-production researching, talking to educators and designers and curators and writers about kind of like a wish list. And then in the end, there's 100 designers that could have easily been in the film or should have been in the film or would have been just as good or better, but you can't have 100 designers in the film, and a lot of it is availability. They're super busy, and I make these things on like credit cards, and so like I can't keep going back to Tokyo, you know. So a lot of it is kind of also who's available, but in the end, it's for me it's about ideas as much as it is about people, and when you kind of get the ideas covered, then it doesn't really make sense to bring in somebody else. Like, yeah, I could have had Philippe Stark come in and talk about something, but I felt like a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about were already talked about. And after that, it's just kind of like name-checking people. And ditto with the kind of, like, it's not a historical film about industrial design or product design. It's not a comprehensive documentary about that either, because there's no such thing as a comprehensive documentary about anything. So why try? That answered the question. But.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got a question about, I guess, something that wasn't really addressed in this film. Design for the other 90%, or the extremes of physical or economic ability. Sure. And
I mean, we talked a little bit about it, obviously, in the the end part there as a concept. I think the film kind of dictates its own, arc, and the film turned into Western consumer goods and the design thereof, which I kind of think, in a way, and not that using design to solve problems in developing countries, and it can be amazingly powerful and affect people's lives. On the other hand, I kind of think that we're the problem, the Western countries and our relationship to this stuff and our relationship to the designers. So that was really more interesting, I think, or at least in terms of the film, was more kind of the subject matter. And yeah, somebody please make another documentary about all the other things beyond, beyond this film. I mean, I kind of thought once I made Helvetica that there would be more design documentaries being made. Yeah, here I am with number 2. So, just pick up a camera, you guys, and, do it. It's not that hard.
I'm curious. I'm sorry, I'm right here. I'm curious what you learned, if anything, about the feedback loop that allows industrial designers to know how to improve their products. I think about that segment that you showed where someone had taped a piece of a plastic cup to their bike fender, or I think about visiting my grandmother in the nursing home and seeing her and all of her friends having tennis balls put on the bottom of their walkers, or everyone who has an anti-glare screen in their iPhone. Why don't they design their products like that when they reissue them? What sort of feedback loop did you learn about that that either doesn't exist or does exist and someone's not listening to it, so that those inherent flaws that continue to be manufactured in these products keep going or get fixed?
Well, I mean, there's more of that going on, and one of the IDEO, the woman from IDEO, the consultancy employ basically like ethnographic research, like field study, and then so one aspect of that just focuses on adaptation, like aftermarket adaptation and kind of correction, and I think they do try to incorporate some aspects of that back into the product redevelopment process, redesign process.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, you know, a lot of it, again, comes back to us as the consumers of it and, like, being vocal about things that we want to be different. Because they're not really going to know, I mean, even if little industries pop up to, you know, make the anti-glare covers and everything else, I think you still need to kind of make it, you know. It's funny, this is the first time I thought about this in a while. My grandmother was one of those people who wrote letters religiously to every product she used. She'd write to the president of, you know, C&H Sugar, and, you know, and would say, like, "Dear sir, I think there's a real improvement you can make to your box, to put a spout on the side of the box that came out instead of opening the top of the box." And I actually have this whole file cabinet of all her letters, and with the, like, really polite responses like, "Dear Mrs. Hustwit, thank you so much, but that would never work. We'll never put this spout on the side of the sugar box, but here's a coupon for a free box of C&H Sugar." But it is that cycle, and now, I mean, obviously with the web, it's like, you know, you know instantly when something isn't working or something's great. I mean, like, how many of you have gone into a store and looked to buy something, and then waited to get back home to just, like, check it on the web and see if it was cheaper or see what people said about it? Show of hands. Yeah, exactly. And that's part of that. I mean, that is part of that feedback loop. And I think that companies, you know, do pay attention to that stuff, because now you can wipe out a brand in you know, with one tweet, basically. Not to bring it all back to Twitter, but
yeah, you're Twitter folk. Well, there's this creative dimension too, which I was talking about a little bit in the film with the hamster. The company was releasing that, basically the body of that for creative hacking, and there are, like, one of my favorite sites is IKEA Hacker, which is really looking at how do you creatively reuse the stuff from IKEA, recombining things. You know, there's the famous example is I think it's called Helmer. I can't believe I remember all these names, but this is a 10-drawer, little skinny, cheap metal cabinet that, like, artists would use to put stuff in it, you know, like tubes of paint and that kind of stuff. They basically gutted it and used it for an open source, open source computing, you know, to use it as basically the CPU cabinet. That's, like, one example of this kind of creative reinvention.
Hi, it was mentioned earlier that designers are almost complicit and part of the problem in our consumerism society. And I guess I'd like to challenge that a little bit and kind of get your reaction maybe to this statement, that our society would still have all of the products and all of the things that we have now. This kind of ties in to the previous question, but all the products we would have would be worse. So designers really are almost inserted into the process as creative, artistic people that make our lives better in the products that we already have and will already demand and use. So I guess I'd like to get your take on that.
I like designer as Avis. I like that. We try harder. Yeah, I think that. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, but you know, I mean, then what's a designer? And you know, and it doesn't really get in the film because it's not a history film. But, like, the invention of the industrial designer, you know, is really a 19th century phenomenon. I mean, you can point to other things beforehand, but really, the role. The person that then becomes it's an intermediary role between something called, we might call the engineer, today, and then the sponsor, I mean the client. So yeah, I mean it would be it would be better, but I don't think designers are the right people to blame necessarily. I think that sometimes they can be enablers, but they're part of a system that produces these problems or these solutions.
Well, there's also, for every designer that's actually thinking about this stuff and trying to do things better and trying to be more efficient, there's 99 who maybe aren't. And I guess that's the, part of the problem. But at the end of the day, I still, not it all comes back to us, but we're still the ones who are kind of enabling it. And yeah, if people stop designing things, life would not be better. I think it would be worse. But I think we're part of this conversation. And I guess that's probably what I was initially trying to kind of do with the film. It's like, get more people into that conversation.
Like we take one more question, if we have one more question. In the middle here. Get you that mic.
Hi, I was wondering if you learned anything that you could extrapolate about the creative process or creativity in general. You've met a lot of creative people. They seem very intelligent, very brilliant. Is there any generalization you could make about that?
I think it's interesting that that's something that Mark Newson says in his piece in the film about anger and frustration being a big driving force, and just why doesn't something exist, and that impulse, and I think that's one thing that's kind of a thread through everybody in the film, and I think through most designers in general. But then it's also kind of my creative process too. Because that's why I make films. I'm like, why isn't there a film about fonts? I want to watch that film, and it doesn't exist, so you have to make it. And that's an impulse that, if you ever feel that way, like, God, why doesn't this thing exist? Damn it! That's probably your cue to do it yourself. So, in a way, I've with this film, I started to kind of realize, well, okay, well maybe I'm just a closet designer, and I'm making these films, to learn more about it, but that's the impulse that I kind of shared, and I kind of just came to that realization like halfway through this film. I'm like, oh, so maybe that's why I'm so interested in making films about design. Films themselves are designs. Very much so, I've found, and I think it's interesting to kind of look at the process that designers go through, and me as a filmmaker, the process that I go through to make the films. It is about storytelling, and it is about user experience. So I think I took some things probably from that. And then I just learned so much about the process. Something that Johnny Ive says, which I think is kind of the secret of Apple too, is that they spend as much time designing the manufacturing systems that then enable them to make the products as they do designing the products themselves. And that's kind of a very unglamorous, behind the scenes thing, but I think it's really important. It's not, you don't just wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to design the MacBook Air, sketch, 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 and hand it off. Like you said, the way that you hold that piece of aluminum through the various processes, they took them a year to design that or something. So they spend as much time making the machinery or making the systems that then can enable them to make these things. And that's something that I hadn't really thought of before. And I think probably most people, who are not in the design world don't think of it. So that was one thing. And yeah. And I learned that they're a little bit more serious than graphic designers. Graphic designers are a little more fun-loving for whatever reason. I think it's because they can, at the very last minute, in the production process, things on press are like, Courier feels better. Let's just change the whole thing and redo it. And when the product designers, once they make the the mold, they cannot change it. So it's a really much more, the tolerances are really exact, and it's a huge deal if they have to make a change at the last minute in the production process. So I think they're a little bit more like engineers, or maybe in that, well, at least some of them in that regard.
And top of that totem pole are architects.
Architects.
They're really at the top, hardcore. Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.